Hey there, cats and kittens. What is up? My name is Alonda Carter, and I am the recovering Hunbot. I create anti-MLM videos and now true crime. But, when you think about it, isn't multi-level marketing kind of, criminal? Something you may not know about me. Not like I've talked about it in any of the anti-MLM videos, but so now you're going to know. One of my favorite genres for movies and for TV is horror. And for some reason, I absolutely love watching those movies where, like there's a couple or some friends and they get stranded somewhere and they're in the middle of nowhere. They creep upon a house and it ends up being inhabited by cannibals. For some reason, I just really enjoy those movies. It's just so creepy to me. I mean, there you are thinking, oh, gee, and I'm going to get some help. But this random house, and no, they're not just regular people, and you're just a passerby, and all of a sudden you're going to become their meal. So I know I said this is crime, but this isn't exactly crime, but it kind of is. I guess it's crime against humanity. So today we're going to look at the history of cannibalism, how it connects to fetishes, and also elite deviance. So if that sounds good to you, then let's get to it. And before we start, I'm going to issue a warning just in case you happen to be sensitive, because the first video I did of this nature, it was kind of like demonetized. I guess it's just the words that I'm using, and the YouTube bots are just not all keen on the words, and I'm not really, like showing anything that's terribly graphic. I'm just telling it to you. Warning, the following presentation is intended for mature audiences. It contains graphic descriptions, adult dialogue, and strong language. Viewer discretion is advised. If you go back in history, and we're not going to cover everything, but really, if you look into ancient history and stuff that's a little bit more modern, you're going to find instances of what we would consider as, cannibalism. Mumia is something that was practiced for a really, really long time because it was thought by consuming the human body, it was going to heal you in some way. From the 12th century through the early part of the 19th century, mummies were stolen for this purpose. Also in ancient China, there was this practice, and it was usually like, when you thought, okay, this is like the last ditch effort, I've got a sick parent and I want to do something to help out my mom, help out my dad. And so what they do would be either take off a piece of a finger or like something from their thigh and feed it to their parents, hoping that was going to make them well. In the past, there also have been funerary rites that involve cannibalism. Interestingly enough, the word cannibalism didn't exist prior to Christopher Columbus. When Christopher Columbus set off and he came back and he reported what he had found to Queen Victoria, he was like, hey, you know what? Everybody's cool, they're friendly and all that sort of stuff. And she was like, oh, rock on. The only problem is going to be, is if people are eating people, because he had let her know that there were these stories that there were these people, these Caribs that, would eat people like when they attacked. And it seemed to be kind of like this warfare strategy thing. So Queen Victoria was not down with anybody, like having dinner and like, eating other people. So she was like, cool, do what you got to do, go get your gold, go do your thing. But if you find people who are like chowing down on each other, ixnay that. And so what Chris did when people were not like revealing the gold that he was looking for, he would just like kind of randomly label people as Caribs. And so these people were put on boats and taken back to England. The word Carib became cannaby, which then became cannibal. And, interestingly enough, if you start looking back, and I didn't look at all of this stuff, but I did find some stuff. When you start looking into the healing arts, medicinal things, there were many times that parts of the human body were used as a cure or treatment. Now, there are some diseases associated with cannibalism, so I'm going to, tell you about that too. Kuru is a rare disease, and it was very high from the 1950s to the 1960s in Papua New Guinea. The foray people contracted a disease because what they practice is, a funerary rite in which they would eat the brains of their deceased relatives and friends. Now, there's no exact history on cannibalism. We don't have like a clean timeline or something like that. But really, when you start looking back into stuff as far back as Neanderthals, and we don't have a Neanderthal that we can just go like, yo, dude, what's up with, chowing down on the thigh bone? We don't have that, but what we do have are paleontologists that have found teeth marks on bones and marrow sucked out of the bones of other Neanderthals. According to Bill Shute, if we didn't have this taboo centered around cannibalism, we'd probably see it a lot more, especially if the conditions were right. Conditions that I'm talking about mean facing starvation or, other things that can threaten human life. Now, in terms of talking about the relationship of cannibalism and fetishes, there are 4 different ones. First is sexual cannibalism, and this is considered to be a psychosexual disorder. And this involves sexualizing the consumption of another person's flesh. Erotophonophilia, I hope I said that right, is the most documented of sexual cannibalism. Often it's referred to as lust murder, and it involves violent fantasies of killing another person. Vorophilia is another type, and it's also sometimes just referred to as vor. Vor is the desire to be consumed by someone else. The idea of being eaten or eating someone or observing someone being eating is some sort of sexualized fantasy. And these fantasies are often acted out online in terms of drawings and photos and stories. Gynophagia, this is another type, and this is having the fetish or the desire to cook and eat human females. A subtype is parthenophagia, which is desire to eat young girls. Sexual autophagy is desire to eat yourself for sexual pleasure. None of these things sound, good to me personally. I mean, hey, if that's what does it for you, it does it for you. But to me, it's just not my thing. Now, I bring all of this up because there is someone who is, there's a number of people who I guess are famous cannibals. And one is Armin Muse. Armin went to the online forum known as Cannibal Cafe, which is now defunct, and there he was looking for someone to be a volunteer victim so that he could consume them. So there was this reciprocal exchange. The Cannibal Cafe was this forum, like I said, in which fantasies and role play could be acted out. However, someone like Armin was serious, in fact, dead serious. Armin posted something like this: looking for someone between the ages of 18 to 30, well-built, who will be willing to be consumed. Long story short, someone responded to Armin's post, and over time, they decided to meet up. The volunteer ended up bleeding out in a bathtub in Armin's home, and Armin was able to use that person's body for 10 months to be able to have as just daily meat. Eventually, Armin was caught and he's serving a life in prison. Today, he's a vegetarian, but he says that just in Germany alone, there could be as many as 800 practicing cannibals. I have not found numbers for the rest of the world. I mean, maybe they're out there, I don't know, but I didn't find that. But I just think that's kind of interesting. So this takes us to online cannibalism because of that whole, forum type stuff. So there's something else in the online world called Dulcet girls. Dulcet is the name of a Canadian fetish artist. Now, I'm not going to show you any of these pictures. You can look them up yourself. I would probably be completely demonetized if I even consider showing you any of those images because, in my opinion, they're pretty wild. They're pretty out there. And to me, when I see these images, I find them very disturbing. I mean, if you're an adult, and whatever works for you, works for you. I mean, I'm not going to take that away from you, but I do think there are some things that it's like, I don't know, just different lines or something. But when I look at this stuff, to me, it's just like, why would anybody want to draw this or look? I mean, I literally just don't understand. Dulcets art took off in the 90s, particularly in some spaces between S&M and snuff. Now, although Cannibal Cafe, that site doesn't exist, you can actually find Dulcet Girls still online. Also, a modern cannibalism can be found on social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or wherever. I mean, like people are going together. People post ads wanting to meet cannibals and wanting to be cannibalized and all this sort of stuff. I didn't venture too far into that world. I found enough just to go, oh my. These online cannibals share art that's photoshopped in Dulcet style. But the question kind of remains, or at least it lingers in my own mind, is like, how much of this is actually real? I mean, do people want to follow in this? Is this just in people's heads and fantasies, or do people really want to act out on this just like Armin did? I found someone who had been in one of these forums, a quote from them, and they basically said that if it was legal, they'd want to try a tiny bite of a girl. There have been some reports that there's some kind of, cannibal club in Hollywood, but is this real? Could this actually exist? I mean, honestly, I don't know. I mean, nothing these days surprises me. I would say, though, when you look back and think about history, and then you think about what it's like with people that have like a lot of excess money, that money and power sort of a thing, could people be involved in things that you and I are just never even knew existed? I mean, maybe so. People who are in the elite class, those that have more money to burn than you and I probably will ever see in a lifetime, their lives are vastly different from our own. And there's also a point when you have so much money, it's like what it takes for you to like heighten the senses and, all of that. It becomes more and more and more. Which brings me to something called elite deviance. Elite deviance has to do with wealth and the access to things. Now, when you think of, deviance, when you think of crime, we don't treat white collar crime the same that we do with, like the common criminals that we will see on TV and things. And it's like we're desensitized to them, but it's the white collar crimes that are going on that are kind of like swept under the rug. We don't hear about those. And so since we don't hear about them, we don't know about them. For instance, in the 80s, it was very common for stockbrokers to use all kinds of different drugs. And then in 2017, all of a sudden there started being a lot of press about politicians, musicians, different celebrities, performers, all who had been involved in sexual harassment of some sort. And this type of sexual harassment had been going on for many, many years, and it was just common. Crimes that happen in the lower classes happen in the upper echelon as well, but we just don't see them. They're just not shining a light on them, I think they just occur in plain sight. Now, this takes me to something called the Cannibal Club. And this is actually something that I just stumbled across. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. And I started digging around into it. The Cannibal Club, the first of it, originated in the Victorian era. And it was a place where people could go and they could talk about things that I guess you couldn't really talk about, openly. There were members from, academics, but there were also people that were associated with the London Stock Exchange. Now, in more recent times, there have been reports, and I'm not saying that there's truth to it. I'm just saying that I came across this information that people in Hollywood, like Meryl Streep and Katy Perry, practice cannibalism, and that they are members of this like little elite group that go to this restaurant that's a secret little restaurant in Los Angeles where they're able to, I guess, have what they desire. There's no real proof of this. There is a website called the Cannibal Club, but nothing on that website has really changed since 2009. And with what's going on in the world right now with COVID-19 and everything, restaurants are making changes to their website. And guess what? This one, absolutely no change. So it just really makes me think that it's just all, totally fake. It's just put up there by someone because they want people to think that this actually does exist. Now, remember I said maybe those that have money They have some sort of little club or something. As a matter of fact, I found one. It's called SNTCM, and supposedly this group, this club, because you have to apply to become a member, and it costs a minimum of $75,000 a year to join just to be able to go to their monthly little gatherings. But they have special parties, and they have supposedly erotic theater. In these events, you wear a mask, and they happen in cities like Los Angeles, New York, Moscow, Kiev. And after watching the show, guests can go into little private rooms and, do what it is they want to do, or they can do it more publicly. And sometimes those masks come off, especially if they're in their own little private room. Is it possible that these elites have a fantasy about consuming human flesh? Is it likely that they may be involved in some sort of fetish game? I would say that's probably highly likely. But fantasy doesn't mean that it's reality unless you cross somebody like Armin. I think there are some instances where fantasy can slip into reality, and I think there can be some dangers of that depending on the people who are involved. I think that this can manifest in dangerous ways and possibly damage people psychologically who might just be kind of going along to get along, and maybe they've had different things happen in their life and someone wants them to do this thing, and so they just do it to be pleasing to someone else. I can definitely see someone who has experienced some sort of trauma, and they're looking for some sort of acceptance to be saying yes to things that they don't really want to do, but they're looking to be accepted. They're looking for love in some way. And so they start going down kind of a slippery slope. The elite, like I said, they don't do things like you and I. Their worlds are very different from ours. Now, something that I did find are some artists who actually are involved in using blood or doing things in a way that's, the art I personally don't understand. I have a background in art, and I think that at times that things just become more outrageous. And the more outrageous it is, there's this certain sector of the elite who will just kind of like latch onto that because that becomes the popular thing to do. Now, allegedly, there's this Latvian artist, Artus Bursons, and what this person did would they put on a live performance on Facebook Live, and they had two willing participants there in which that he was able to cut off some of their flesh, fry it up, and then feed it back to them. I personally don't understand why anyone would want to watch that. I don't know why anyone would want to participate in that. Just reporting what I found. And I guess you could call this extreme performance art. I also came across something that's called edge play, a particular fetish involved in edge play that's considered very dangerous, and it involves blood. It can involve smearing blood or blood-like liquids on someone else, or drinking blood, all kinds of different things revolving around blood. Another performance artist by the name of Marina Abramovic, I'm not sure if I said that right either. These names, I'm sorry. Anyway, she focused on pain, blood, and pushing physical limitations. She collaborated with someone else, Jacob Samuel, and they put together these aphrodisiac-like recipes in spirit cooking. The recipes were intended to be thought-provoking, but they were also met with a lot of criticism as well. There were lines in it such as 13 grams of jealousy and instructions that included mixing breast milk with sperm milk. There was also a multimedia installation, and then there was a book which was supposed to have some kind of like self-help type, instructions in it. Later on, this entire idea of spirit cooking, it evolved into these dinner parties, and it was dinner parties for the, elite, the wealthy people. People like Deborah Harry would have these elaborate parties. In fact, she had two cakes created, one of herself that was life-size and another one of the artist Marina, also life-size. And people were, it was their bodies, their nude bodies, and people were eating the cake. So to me, that's kind of like symbolic cannibalism in some way, but still it just kind of, it's extreme to me to think That's the kind of cake that you want to have. But I'm not part of that elite class. There's a lot going on that we don't see. It's a very, very deep rabbit hole. You start looking at these things and you just don't know what you're going to find. The world of the elite, the rich, the wealthy is so very different than yours and mine. And even so, it can be so very different, but there will be things that are happening literally right in front of our eyes that we just don't even notice. For example, think about Jeffrey Epstein. He was accused of sex trafficking in July of 2019. His death in August of 2019 was ruled as suicide, but there's also people out there that are thinking, there was some foul play involved. Epstein knew a lot of very wealthy and connected people. He had an island in the Caribbean that was 70 acres. And on that island, that's where he brought a lot of underage girls. And these rich and powerful people would fly in from different areas of the world to be on his island. And I can only imagine things happened. Is it possible that there on the island that there were any of these games that involved, the idea of cannibalism? I really have no idea. I'm just, putting that out there that you just don't know what could be going on, behind those doors or why people were drawn there. Combining money, power, sex, fetishes, all this stuff, and these very young girls, to me, sounds like it's very, very dangerous for those girls. Now, you may not realize this, but you may have experienced a form of cannibalism. Think about symbolic cannibalism. For instance, that really applies in Christian practices, such as taking the body of Christ and then the blood of Christ. There's symbology involved with the wafer and the glass of wine. Survival cannibalism, that's going to be something like the Donner Party. That's when there's an extreme condition and, them's the choice. You either eat or you die. Learned cannibalism is something else. There's endo and exo cannibalism. Endo cannibalism is eating someone within the group. Exo cannibalism is eating someone who is outside of the group. In general, think of Aztec warriors who would eat people, and it was more of a, it's kind of like warfare. And I think about one of the things that I studied as a graduate student in anthropology was trophy heads, human trophy heads and trophy head iconography. And trophy heads were definitely used as a sign basically to put fear, at least that's what one of the thoughts is that it was used to demonstrate that, your power and, to have people afraid of you and, kind of back down. So I'm kind of thinking that, exocannibalism would be the same sort of a thing, a relationship to that. Does that make sense? But then there's pathological cannibalism, and you're probably familiar with Jeffrey Dahmer. And, Armin Muse, he's going to fit in that too. So there's that. Now, the one that you may have actually experienced beyond the symbolic cannibalism is autocannibalism. And that's going to be when you do something like if you chew on your fingernails. Now, in researching all of this, because I didn't know where I was going, I was starting out with, okay, there's this idea that there's people who are practicing cannibalism in Hollywood. And I'm going, I don't know if that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, You just never know what could actually be going on. I found something as I was reading stuff where and I don't believe this, but I was like, oh my gosh, I was just seeing it written as like, this is just so bizarre that there's like this place where women are raised to be to be used as meat. Maybe you don't think it's possible for cannibalism to be going on in the modern world, but maybe you do. Is it something that could be going on and we just don't know about it? Looking at the phenomenon historically and in the ancient world, and then connecting it to fetishes and then the elite and all of these different things, could this be something that is part of a subsect of people that happens? I honestly don't know, but I throw it out there because you just never know. Again, truth is just stranger than fiction. I mean, these very different role plays and fetishes, is this something where someone over time could eventually cross a line? I don't know. Could there be some group that you pay a lot of money to be a member of for the privilege of consuming human flesh? Again, I don't know. But there are rumors that there are these secret societies or something that's exactly what people are doing. What do you think? Let me know. If there's some true crime that's happened that you would like me to investigate it, specifically in Texas, because this segment is called Deep in the Crime of Texas, and there's a lot that's happened here, and maybe it would be somewhere else, and I'll just put a disclaimer, whatever. But I just thought that was a catchy little thing, Deep in the Crime of Texas. So if there's something kind of creepy and you think, oh, that'd be an interesting story, let me know in the comments. And what do you think? Do you think there could be people amongst us that enjoy or they're thinking about eating human flesh? I mean, what do you think about that? Is it possible? This is just some conversation to have, especially during these uncertain times. I mean, I'm looking for something to entertain me. I'm sure you're looking for something to entertain you. And don't forget to do that like and subscribe, ring the bell, all that sort of a stuff. And I'll see you next time.